Amelia Carter, 29, never quite fit into the Carter family's idea of what success looked like. Her cousin Vanessa had once told her at a family gathering, with a syrupy smile and a champagne flute in hand, "You're more of a dreamer, aren't you? That's cute." In the Carter clan, success was worn like jewelry, loud, heavy, and meant to be noticed. Vanessa embodied that philosophy to the core. She had the designer heels, the private school degree, and the fiancé with a trust fund. Amelia, meanwhile, had ambition that didn't come with a spotlight and a journey paved with hard work instead of handouts. Have you ever been quietly underestimated by the people closest to you, only to later prove them completely wrong? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you turn the tables. And if you're enjoying these stories of sweet, silent revenge and personal triumph, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more. It was Vanessa's engagement party that brought Amelia back into their orbit, a formal garden affair at the Hilton Grand Estate just outside the city, where everyone arrived in black, tinted SUV or sleek European sedans. Amelia, having flown in from a business meeting out of state, had no time to change and caught a cab directly from the airport. Her casual pantsuit and the dusty taxi didn't turn heads for the right reasons. As she stepped out of the cab, the valet barely offered her a glance, but Vanessa noticed. Oh, she noticed. With a high-pitched laugh that echoed across the marble stairs, Vanessa turned to her group of Gucci-clad girlfriends and said just loud enough for Amelia to hear, "Some people still take taxis. That's quaint." Amelia's heart stung for a moment, but she held her expression steady. She'd been underestimated before, many times, too many in fact, but she knew something Vanessa didn't. This wasn't her final arrival. It was just the beginning of the kind of entrance that made people remember your name. The laughter faded into the background as Amelia walked into the courtyard. The chatter buzzed, the clinking of glasses and garden lights twinkling against the night sky set the scene for a celebration that had nothing to do with her. But despite being overlooked, she wasn't there for validation. She had her reasons for coming, and soon those reasons would be impossible to ignore. Inside, Amelia kept her distance. The relatives who once asked why she hadn't taken over her father's real estate firm were now the same ones gossiping about the app she launched, that no one really understood. It didn't matter to them that her startup had recently closed Series B funding, or that a major tech outlet just featured her on its 40 under 40 list. To them, success had to be flaunted to be real. Amelia preferred hers to be felt. Hours passed, the crowd grew louder, and just when Amelia considered calling a car and leaving unnoticed, a message pinged on her phone. Her driver had arrived precisely on cue. She walked outside calmly, her heels clicking against the polished tile of the courtyard entrance. That same group of girls, Vanessa's inner circle, was still gathered by the steps. And so was Vanessa, her laughter sharp like perfume in the air. Amelia waited silently. The sound of a powerful engine purred nearby, drawing attention. A sleek, obsidian black Rolls Royce Phantom pulled up to the curb. Its chrome detailing shimmered under the moonlight, and the family crest, a gift from her father before his passing, gleamed on the custom plates. The chauffeur, clad in a tailored suit and white gloves, stepped out briskly, opened the rear door, and bowed. For a split second, silence blanketed the courtyard. Then came the gasps, the murmurs, and Vanessa's expression. Frozen halfway between confusion and disbelief, Amelia didn't gloat. She simply offered a polite nod to the stunned onlookers and slid into the back seat like she had done 100 times before. The door shut with a satisfying click, and the car pulled away slowly, leaving a trail of stunned expressions and silenced whispers behind. She looked out the tinted window and smiled, not because she had proven anything to them, but because she had never needed their approval to begin with. She built her success in silence, and now it spoke volumes. The party faded in the rearview mirror, but its bitterness lingered with Amelia Carter long after the Rolls Royce rounded the final curve of the estate's driveway. She didn't need validation, but something about Vanessa's smirk, the echo of her judgmental laughter, had sunk into Amelia's chest like a splinter. It wasn't about the taxi or the Rolls. It wasn't even about the stares from those overdressed socialites. It was about being reduced to a punchline in a story she had written with sweat and grit. Her chauffeur, Michael, glanced at her through the rear-view mirror. "Miss Carter," he asked gently, "would you like to take the scenic route back to your hotel?" She shook her head. "No, Michael, take me to HQ." It was nearly 10:30 p.m. when they pulled into the underground garage of her company's downtown tech hub. The building, a sleek glass front structure with Amelia's startup name subtly engraved on the plaque at the door, still buzzed with activity. Her team often joked that they operated on Amelia time, meaning work didn't end until the idea was executed, and executed perfectly. As she stepped off the elevator into the executive suite, her assistant, Marlon, looked up from his desk, startled. "Amelia, I didn't think you'd be back until morning." She smiled faintly. "Change of plans. I needed air that didn't smell like fake humility and champagne." He laughed knowingly. "Vanessa's party." She nodded. "The usual circus, but don't worry. I didn't throw wine in anyone's face, if that's what you're asking." Amelia walked into her glass-walled office, sat behind her desk, and pulled up the current investor deck on her dual monitors. The final presentation was just 2 days away, the one that could elevate her company from startup to full-scale enterprise. She was already in talks with a global logistics firm, and if everything landed correctly, the Carter family name would pale next to the one she had built herself, Amelia Tech. But as she scanned through slides, something gnawed at her. The weight wasn't coming from the business. It was the past. Growing up, she had always been second tier. Her mother once told her, "Sweetheart, you're brilliant, but you're not captivating like Vanessa. That girl just knows how to work a room." It had been meant as a compliment, an honest motherly observation, but for Amelia it was a sentence she'd spent her whole life rewriting. She remembered their childhood vividly. Vanessa had been the golden girl at school, the lead in every play, the homecoming queen. Meanwhile, Amelia spent her weekends in libraries, sketching out wireframes and devouring books about systems design and early computer languages. While Vanessa dated the captain of the rugby team, Amelia built an early AI chatbot before she turned 17. But the family only noticed Vanessa's prom dress, not the scholarship Amelia quietly earned. When their grandfather passed, Vanessa delivered a eulogy so flowery and dramatic that it brought people to tears, even though she hadn't visited him in the final 6 months of his life. Amelia had spoken too, quietly, from a corner of the service, recounting his stories and quirky habits. No one remembered it. She remembered the way Aunt Lydia patted her shoulder afterward and said, "That was sweet, dear," before rushing off to compliment Vanessa's incredible presence. That night at the party, Amelia hadn't been seeking attention. But as the valet laughed under his breath when he saw her cab, as her relatives turned their backs to avoid her after Vanessa's comment, the realization burned in her gut. They would never see her for who she truly was, until they had no choice. And maybe that moment had come sooner than expected. Her phone buzzed, an encrypted message from one of the company's lead engineers. The integration test was a success. Phase 2 is greenlit. Amelia's heart surged. The next day, she'd be presenting their multi-patented logistics optimization tool to a global conglomerate. If the demo hit as hard as they anticipated, it would be the largest software partnership their industry had seen in 5 years. Ironically, the lead investor was the same man who once funded a failed firm her cousin's fiancé had pitched. In fact, Amelia had discovered that her cousin had tried to land the same deal just 6 months ago and failed spectacularly. No one at the party knew that, yet. Amelia stood from her chair and walked to the window. The city lights reflected in the glass, but she was seeing something else entirely. The look on Vanessa's face when the press release would drop. The headlines would announce Amelia Carter as the force behind a technology that would revolutionize shipping worldwide, not a whisper of family name leverage, no inheritance, no handouts, just her, and still, the bitter taste wouldn't fade completely. Not because she wanted to rub it in, but because there was still a part of her that wanted to be seen by them, understood, even respected. She wasn't sure why. Maybe some wounds just sat deeper than success could reach. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a group message thread titled Family Planning Weekend. Vanessa had added her without asking. Amelia read the message aloud with a tired smile. Since everyone will already be in town for the engagement brunch, I thought we'd rent out the yacht club for a girls' afternoon. We'll have a who's most likely to succeed theme just for fun. She didn't reply. Not yet, not until the launch. Not until the whole city knew what Vanessa had failed to see her whole life. The moment would come, and when it did, Amelia wouldn't have to say a word. 2 days after Vanessa's charity gala, Amelia found herself standing backstage at one of the most exclusive industry summits of the year. Tech Future Now. It was an invite-only gathering of executives, venture capitalists, media titans, and forward thinkers, all buzzing with curiosity about the next big innovation in global commerce. And this year, they were here because of her. Amelia adjusted the lapel of her blazer as she looked at her reflection in the green room mirror. Her face was calm, but beneath it was the weight of years of invisible labor. She wasn't nervous, at least not in the way most would expect. She had rehearsed this presentation for months, refined the demo down to every second. The nerves came from knowing how personal this moment had become. The previous night, Vanessa had texted her. A sarcastic, backhanded message wrapped in faux support. Saw your name on the Tech Future guest list. Must be nice to sit in the audience. Amelia didn't respond. She simply turned off her phone and kept reviewing her slides. Vanessa still didn't know that Amelia wasn't attending the summit. She was headlining it. Behind her, Marlon entered with a tablet in hand. "You're up in 5, he said, his voice buzzing with excitement. "You should see the crowd out there, packed to the rafters, journalists, global investors. A couple execs from Atlas Shipping even flew in from London. That caught her attention. Atlas Shipping, the billion-dollar freight empire that had rejected her cousin's fiancé's pitch last year. Her tech would save them millions, and now they were coming to her. Amelia took a deep breath and walked toward the side stage. The host was already reading her introduction. The visionary behind one of the most disruptive logistics solutions of our decade. Please welcome CEO and founder of Amelia Tech, Amelia Carter. The applause was thunderous. As she stepped into the spotlight, Amelia took in the sea of faces. Some familiar, others unknown, but all of them waiting, watching, listening. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I'd like to tell you a story, not about me, but about a world that isn't working. A world where a shipping delay in Shanghai causes food shortages in Sudan, where a misrouted container costs millions in lost goods, where a mother in a rural town waits 2 extra weeks for her child's medication because someone's system didn't talk to someone else's." The crowd leaned in. She continued, walking across the stage with effortless grace. "For the past 3 years, my team and I have been building a solution that doesn't just patch the system, it reinvents it. Real-time route optimization, AI-powered port tracking, predictive congestion modeling, and today, for the first time, I'm going to show you what happens when a global freight company adopts Amelia Tech." The lights dimmed and the live demo began. A simulation played across the massive screen behind her, showing 2 identical shipping routes, one traditional, one powered by Amelia Tech. The results were stunning. Time reduced by 43%, costs slashed, carbon emissions cut in half, and perhaps most importantly, emergency medical supplies were routed in real time to high-risk zones. The room burst into applause. By the end of the presentation, her inbox had already begun filling with inquiries from major players. Her LinkedIn was pinging. Her company's website temporarily crashed from the traffic surge, but one message stood out. Subject: "We'd like to discuss partnership opportunities." Atlas Shipping Group. Amelia's heart thudded once, twice. She didn't open it right away. She just stared at the name. The same Atlas Group her cousin's fiancé, Tyler, had tried so desperately to court. The same one that had told him his pitch was naive and impractical. Amelia remembered overhearing Vanessa at a family barbecue, mocking Amelia's work with a glass of wine in hand. She thinks she's going to fix global shipping. Please, she can barely fix her hair. And now that very empire wanted to meet her, not Vanessa, not Tyler, not anyone with a flashy last name or social connections, her. Back at her office later that evening, she finally opened the email. It was from the chief strategy officer himself. Formal, direct, impressed. We were beyond impressed with your demonstration at Tech Future. We've been following your work quietly for some time and would like to discuss exclusive licensing terms. Could you meet in person this week? Amelia smiled. She replied instantly. Thursday, 11 a.m., my office. On Thursday morning, Amelia arrived at her headquarters early. She wore a navy suit tailored to perfection and minimal jewelry, her usual understated elegance. The boardroom had been freshly cleaned, water bottles lined, screens prepped. Marlon buzzed in, "They're here." The elevator doors opened and in walked two sharply dressed men from Atlas Shipping, flanked by a woman holding a legal folder. And trailing awkwardly behind them, looking entirely out of place, was Tyler. Amelia blinked. Tyler, Vanessa's fiancé, wearing the same overconfident smirk he'd worn at every holiday dinner. He froze when he saw her at the head of the boardroom table. "You," he blurted before he could stop himself. "You're the CEO of Amelia Tech." The room went silent. One of the Atlas executives glanced sideways at Tyler, clearly annoyed. Amelia stood up calmly, extended her hand to the group, and said with professional precision, "Welcome to Amelia Tech. Let's begin." The meeting lasted nearly an hour. Charts, projections, use cases, ROI models. Amelia answered every question with clarity and control, while Tyler sat silent, occasionally sweating under his collar. The Atlas team didn't even look to him for input. He had become invisible in a room he used to dominate. As the executives left, shaking her hand and promising to have lawyers draft the partnership terms by Monday, Tyler lingered. "Amelia," he said under his breath, "I had no idea you were this." She raised an eyebrow. "You mean capable?" "No, I mean, look, I wasn't trying to laugh at you, at least not personally. Vanessa told us your tech was still in beta. We didn't know you were this far ahead. Vanessa was wrong," Amelia said simply. "About a lot of things." He nodded, embarrassed. "She's going to freak when she finds out you're licensing to Atlas. We tried for months to get a meeting." Amelia tilted her head. "Maybe next time. Try not laughing at the girl pulling up in a taxi." Tyler didn't have a response. He left with his head lowered. Amelia returned to her office window, watching the street below. For years, she had walked quietly through rooms where her family didn't see her. For years, she let them write the story. But now, she was writing it herself, and everyone, even Tyler, was finally reading. The next few weeks transformed everything. After that humiliating wedding day incident, I had sworn to myself I would never again let anyone, especially my cousin Delilah, find my worth by what I appeared to have. I had spent too long letting people think that because I was quiet, or because I lived a simple, low-key life, I was somehow lesser. I didn't have the flashy Instagram lifestyle, or the brand name obsession my cousin clung to, but I had something more powerful, vision. And now I was finally ready to let the world see it. Back in the city, I dove headfirst into my business. What had begun as a side hustle, sourcing eco-luxury materials for high-end designers, was now blossoming into something far greater. I wasn't just supplying materials anymore. I had begun designing. The sustainable fashion house I had been quietly building for the past 3 years was finally coming together. My minimalist apartment, stacked with design mock-ups and fabric samples, became a war room of strategy and creation. Every insult I remembered from that wedding, every snide glance, every sneer, fueled my drive. I wanted to rise not for revenge, but to reclaim the narrative they had stolen from me. The turning point came unexpectedly. One afternoon, I received an invitation to showcase my designs at an exclusive private trunk show hosted by none other than Julia Winford, the legendary editor known for turning unknowns into global sensations overnight. Julia had come across one of my designs through a boutique in Milan and requested to see more. My heart raced as I read her message over and over. This was the moment I had been preparing for. and it was happening. The trunk show was a whirlwind. Industry titans floated through the candle-lit room, sipping champagne, murmuring admiration as models walked between tables, each draped in one of my signature eco-luxury pieces. My fabrics glowed under the soft lights: organic silks, recycled cashmere, repurposed metals woven like thread. There was nothing gimmicky about it. It was quiet opulence, conscious extravagance, and people noticed. The very next day, Julia herself sent me a handwritten note. "You've built something timeless. I'd like to feature you in next month's spotlight. Let's talk more." That was all I needed. I didn't sleep that night, not out of nerves, but because I was finally electrified with something I hadn't felt in years. Validation from someone who mattered on merit alone. Soon after, the offers began pouring in. Orders from luxury boutiques in New York and Paris, requests for interviews, even a partnership offer from one of the biggest fashion conglomerates in Europe. But I wasn't chasing clout. I chose partners who aligned with my values. My brand, Elias et Terre, would never compromise sustainability for profit, or chase trends over ethics. And that quiet conviction started to speak louder than any marketing campaign. One afternoon, while finalizing a shoot location with my new creative director, I got a message from an unknown number. "Family brunch at Delilah's this Sunday. Dad says everyone's invited. Hope you can come, Nathan." My cousin's younger brother had always been kind to me, and I could sense the awkwardness in the message. I stared at the screen for a while. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Part of me didn't want to return to the scene of the original wound. But then I realized this was no longer about avoiding them. I had moved on. I had built something extraordinary. I had nothing to prove and everything to own. So I responded, wouldn't miss it. That Sunday morning, I chose not to overthink my outfit. I wore one of my own pieces, an elegant cream-colored linen suit with subtle gold embroidery along the cuffs. Understated but powerful. I didn't arrive in a taxi this time. A deep navy Rolls-Royce Ghost waited outside my building, the driver opening the door with precision. I didn't request anything dramatic. I simply walked out, stepped in, and let the car carry me with quiet confidence. Delilah's home was buzzing. Cars packed the long circular driveway. Waiters floated between groups of laughing relatives holding flutes of mimosas. I stepped out just as my cousin turned her head toward the entrance. Her smile froze mid-sip, and then the driver moved around the car and opened the back door with a crisp MS. "Elias, we've arrived." I didn't look at her reaction, not yet. I nodded politely to the chauffeur, adjusted my sunglasses, and walked toward the crowd. Conversations faltered, heads turned. Delilah blinked and stepped forward. "Oh, wow, you made it," she said, voice coated in forced politeness. "We weren't sure you'd be able to come. I was invited," I replied calmly, accepting a glass of sparkling water from a passing server. She glanced toward the rolls again. "Nice ride," she said, trying to sound casual. "It's a company car," I said lightly. "We use it for key meetings and events." "Company?" Her voice cracked just a little. "Yes," I nodded. "Elias et Terre, sustainable fashion house. We just got featured in Vogue." Someone behind her gasped. My aunt, her mother, stepped forward. "Vogue you? That's wonderful, darling." The same woman who once asked if I needed a loan to buy shoes was now practically beaming. "We always knew you had potential." "No, you didn't," I said, not unkindly. "But that's okay, I found people who did." My cousin tried to pivot. "Well, I mean, of course we always hoped you'd find your thing. It's just that we thought you were still doing, what was it, sewing? I tilted my head. "No, I run the design team. We supply some of the top retailers globally. Though yes, everything starts with a stitch." And just like that, the dynamic shifted. For the first time in my life, I was being listened to. Not dismissed, not laughed at, not whispered about. I was a guest of honor without needing a stage. My success wasn't just visible, it was undeniable. As the brunch continued, people came up to ask questions about my work. My uncle asked for a business card. My aunt wanted to know if I ever did private fittings. Delilah remained quiet, her smile a tight mask. At one point, she leaned in and said, "You've really changed." "No," I said, meeting her gaze. "I've always been this. You're just now seeing it." She didn't reply, By the end of the event, my mother, who had also been at the wedding all those months ago, came up and hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "Not because you made it big, but because you did it on your terms." That night, back at my apartment, I sat on my balcony looking out at the city skyline. The rolls had been returned to the garage, the embroidered suit was hung neatly in my closet, and I, for the first time in years, felt entirely at peace, because I had realized something. You don't need to scream to be seen. You don't need to fight to be recognized. Sometimes, the quiet ones build empires while others are too busy laughing. And when the moment finally comes, when you pull up and the world sees you for what you've become, you don't need to say a word. When the moment came that weekend, it was almost too cinematic to believe. The exclusive charity gala at the Lakeside Metropolitan Museum was a sea of gowns, glinting jewelry, and high society's most polished smiles. My cousin Evelyn had made sure the entire extended family received invitations months ago, loudly promoting how her tech fiancé had secured their table and donated generously. She knew I wouldn't be arriving in a luxury car. She knew I wouldn't be escorted by a celebrity or socialite. But she didn't know what I had been working on behind the scenes. I stepped out of the taxi onto the museum's red carpet, wearing a sleek, tailored black gown with subtle beading that shimmered under the spotlights. My arrival was immediately noticed, not because of the dress, but because Evelyn was already standing nearby, surrounded by her circle of judgment. Her laughter rang out as she turned and gestured flamboyantly toward my taxi. "Couldn't afford valet, Claire," she smirked, clutching her wine glass. I smiled politely and said nothing. That silence confused her more than any insult I could have thrown. Then, just as I reached the entrance, a second vehicle pulled up. This one long, black, gleaming under the lights, a custom Rolls Royce Phantom. The chauffeur exited, straightened his blazer, and stepped briskly toward me. "Ms. Claire Bennett," he said with a respectful nod. "We're ready when you are." The air shifted. Evelyn's smirk cracked like a dropped porcelain teacup. She stepped closer, glass nearly tipping from her fingers. "Wait, what's going on?" I didn't answer her. Instead, I walked toward the Rolls Royce and handed my small clutch to the chauffeur. Then I turned back, eyes calmly meeting Evelyn's. "Thanks for waiting. That cab was just a decoy so I wouldn't have to answer too many questions from the press outside." For once, Evelyn had no response. Inside the gala, the event was already in full swing. Waiters circulated with trays of oysters and champagne. A string quartet played from the balcony above. The theme was innovation and impact, and I knew that later in the evening, several emerging entrepreneurs would be introduced on stage. Evelyn thought she was one of them. She'd been bragging for weeks that her fiancé's startup had received a special mention, and that she was listed in the family recognition page of the brochure. What she hadn't anticipated was that the foundation had reached out to me privately. Just 2 months ago, they had been made aware, through an article in a lesser-known international journal, about the AI tool I had built that was revolutionizing logistics for humanitarian aid. What had started as a college-side project, something even my parents once dismissed as cute but unrealistic, had grown rapidly thanks to relentless work, countless rejections, and a recent quiet partnership with a European NGO. When they invited me to speak at the gala, I'd initially declined. I didn't want my work turned into a socialite's talking point. But after Evelyn's taxi comment and years of her belittling every one of my achievements, I changed my mind. I mingled throughout the night with donors, board members, and community leaders, never once needing to reference Evelyn or our rivalry. I simply existed as myself, and yet, everywhere I went, people's eyes shifted back and forth, from me to her. The contrast was becoming evident. Evelyn tried desperately to reclaim the spotlight, throwing out facts about her fiancé's app, bragging about an upcoming podcast interview. But when the director of the Innovation and Impact Fund took the stage and began listing names, hers was noticeably absent. Tonight, we recognize a woman whose quiet dedication and brilliant mind have transformed the way critical supplies reach disaster zones, the director announced. She declined publicity and shunned startup culture, but her code now guides entire fleets of supply vehicles in over a dozen countries. Please welcome our final honoree, Claire Bennett. It was surreal. The room erupted into applause, and I made my way toward the stage with measured calm. My parents, seated 2 rows from the front, wore stunned expressions, my mother clutching her pearls, my father sitting upright like he'd just been shot with adrenaline. Evelyn's fiancé clapped awkwardly, clearly trying to do damage control. But Evelyn, she stared, frozen. At the podium, I spoke with the poise of someone who had waited a long time to be heard. I didn't mention Evelyn or the years I spent in her shadow. I spoke about systems, ethics, and people, not profits. I thanked the partners and field workers who took risks every day to deliver supplies. I ended with a simple thought. Sometimes it's not the loudest voice in the room that drives change. It's the one that never stopped working while the rest were busy talking. Afterward, I was mobbed by handshakes and invitations. Several major investors, including 2 Evelyn had been chasing for months, asked if I'd be open to strategic partnerships. I gave them my card and told them to reach out Monday. But the best moment came when the event photographer caught a candid shot of Evelyn watching me from across the room, face unreadable, fingers clenched around her empty wine glass. Back at my table, my father finally leaned toward me. "Why didn't you tell us?" I smiled faintly. "Would you have believed me if I had?" He didn't answer, but he didn't have to. By the time the gala wrapped up, Evelyn had already slipped out. But the story had been told, and the truth was now permanently on record. And just like that, the girl she used to laugh at, the one arriving in a taxi, had rewritten the narrative completely. I hadn't planned on returning to that estate again, especially not under these circumstances. The last time I had set foot there, I was 13, wearing hand-me-down sneakers with a broken sole. And my cousin Amelia had thrown a fit because I accidentally touched her designer handbag with chocolate. Stained fingers. That memory stayed with me, not because of the handbag, but because of how everyone had treated me afterward, as if I were some stain on the luxury furniture. So when I arrived this time, dressed in an understated but perfectly tailored navy blue suit, the irony wasn't lost on me. And neither was the timing. The estate's annual spring gala was the most important social event in our extended family. My Uncle Gregory hosted it with flair, showcasing his vineyard, fine art collection, and influence over nearly every prominent face in our town. For years, Amelia used the event as a stage for her curated life. Perfect dress, perfect date, perfect entrance. This year, she made hers in a champagne, colored gown worth more than my first year of business expenses. And I made mine in a black taxi. Yes, a black taxi. Not because I didn't have a better option, but because I had something planned. Something that would change the narrative everyone in that estate believed. When the taxi pulled up to the entrance and I stepped out, the snickering started instantly. Amelia, naturally, was at the center of it, standing with her usual circle of spoiled cousins and society's social media climbers. She let out a laugh so loud it turned heads. "Oh my God," she sneered, eyes sweeping my outfit with a mocking grin. "You actually came in a taxi. Do they even let taxis onto this driveway anymore?" Laughter erupted around her like a firecracker, fast and sharp. I said nothing. I adjusted my sleeves, thanked the driver quietly, and closed the door behind me. Then, with perfect timing, a black Rolls Royce Phantom slid up behind the taxi and stopped. The chauffeur stepped out, walked past me with precision, and opened the back door. Of course, not for Amelia, for me. The laughter died as if someone had pressed mute. Amelia blinked. Wait, what? The chauffeur Marcus gave a professional nod. "Mr. Ellis, your guests are arriving at the private tent. Shall I escort you there?" I looked over at Amelia, her mouth slightly agape, and smiled politely. "Yes, thank you, Marcus. Oh, and Amelia." I paused, turning to face her fully. "That taxi, rented it just to test a point. You proved it perfectly. There was no comeback, none that would have made sense anyway." I walked past her entourage as they stood in stunned silence, her boyfriend trying to pretend he hadn't joined in on the laughter. Behind the estate's main lawn, a private white canopy had been set up. A last. Minute edition approved by Uncle Gregory himself once the mayor confirmed her attendance. And inside it stood my real allies, business partners, investors, and community leaders who had seen what I'd built from scratch and decided to back me publicly. As I stepped into the private tent, the mayor herself approached me with a warm handshake. "David, your keynote at the Small Business Summit last month was brilliant. Your platform for young entrepreneurs, game-changing. Thank you, Mayor Sullivan," I replied, trying not to show the slight tremble in my hand. These moments still overwhelmed me sometimes. Behind her, I spotted Mr. Patel, the owner of one of the largest logistics companies in the state. He had recently merged with my startup, seeing in it a future he hadn't found in other tech firms. A year ago, Amelia wouldn't have believed I could afford lunch at a hotel cafe. Today, I co-owned one of the fastest growing fleet management software platforms in the region, and they were here to celebrate that. The gala had reached full swing. Guests mingled across the estate, waiters weaving through the crowds with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. I watched from the sidelines as Amelia tried to pretend none of what happened at the entrance had shaken her. But her facade was cracking, especially when Uncle Gregory approached me, having heard the commotion from one of his assistants. "David," he said, slightly breathless, "I had no idea you were coming like that." "Neither did Amelia," I replied calmly. He gave a forced chuckle. "She's dramatic, but she means well." "I know what she means," I said, looking at him evenly. "Always has." Gregory's face faltered slightly. "Your father would have been proud," he said after a pause. "I didn't realize until recently how far you'd come." "Most of the family didn't," I said, not with bitterness but with quiet honesty, because most weren't watching. Amelia wasn't done, though. She cornered me outside the tent with a hollow smile. "So what is this, some stunt to humiliate me? Did I say anything untrue?" I asked, meeting her gaze. "You laughed, the chauffeur came, you got quiet." Her mouth twitched. "You think owning a car changes everything." "It's not the car, Amelia," I said. "It's everything behind it. The struggle, the silence, the grind. The times I walked to job interviews in the rain while you posted vacation pictures from yachts your daddy paid for. You laughed because of a taxi, but a taxi isn't humiliation. Shame is pretending money gives you class." She flinched and for once had no snide reply. Before she could say more, a small group approached us, investors and officials. One of them extended a hand toward me. "David Ellis, right? My son just joined your mentorship program. He said it changed his life. Thank you." Amelia watched as I accepted the handshake and exchanged a few words, and in that moment, the balance between us shifted entirely. For years, she had been the face of success in the family, effortless, loud, curated. But now, in the face of quiet, tangible achievement, her noise felt empty. As the gala wound down, I gave a short speech at the request of the mayor. It wasn't part of the official program, but the buzz around the event had made its way to Gregory, and he agreed, grudgingly but publicly. I stood under the garden lights, microphone in hand. "Success," I said, scanning the familiar faces, "doesn't always look like what we expect. Sometimes it walks in late, takes a taxi, and carries 10 years of failure behind a smile. Sometimes it's the quiet kid no one believed in, until he changed something that couldn't be ignored. I'm proud of where I started, and I'm even prouder of where I'm headed. Thank you." As applause rose, I met Amelia's eyes across the garden. She didn't clap. She didn't smile. But she didn't laugh either. The moment that shook the balance in the family dynamics didn't come with thunder or grand speeches. It came quietly, precisely the way I had rebuilt my life. After that explosive evening outside the gala, where Max's laughter faded and confusion clouded his expression the second the chauffeur opened the rolls, Roy's door for me, things had shifted. My cousin, once the loudest in the room, suddenly found silence more appropriate around me. The cousins who'd once overlooked me, who saw me as the odd one out, the charity case with hand-me-down dreams, began to treat me with an unfamiliar caution, like they were still trying to compute the version of me that had been hiding in plain sight all along. After the gala, I returned home to messages. Texts from people who had ignored me for years. Some were curious, others were sheepishly attempting small talk, trying to reinsert themselves into my orbit now that the roles Royce had opened more than just a car door. It had revealed a version of me they had never cared to see. But I wasn't interested in flaunting revenge or rubbing salt in old wounds. I had something bigger on the horizon. A week later, I got a call from my Aunt Lorraine, Max's mother. Her voice carried the weight of both concern and subtle panic. "Sweetheart," she said, avoiding my name, "we're planning a little brunch this weekend at the estate. Just family. We'd love for you to come by." I knew exactly what this was. Damage control. They wanted to reel me back in, restore the narrative before it spun further out of their grip. I agreed, not because I was eager to see them, but because I wanted them to see something. Not money, not power, but clarity. When I arrived that Sunday, I didn't come with chauffeurs or bodyguards. I arrived alone, driving a simple black sedan, deliberately underwhelming in appearance. Max was already there, pretending to scroll through his phone when I entered. His eyes darted up, then away, then up again, unsure if he should be embarrassed or defensive. His father, Uncle Leonard, offered me a stiff nod, and Aunt Lorraine pulled me into one of those overly long, slightly trembling hugs. The kind of hug that says, "I'm sorry," without the person having the guts to say it out loud. We sat at the massive oak dining table, polished and gleaming as ever, but the shine couldn't mask the tension. Small talk buzzed awkwardly around the room. How was work? How was the city? Did I still live near Kensington? Then the conversation found its way, inevitably, to business, so Aunt Lorraine began, stabbing her fork into a too-firm piece of melon. "We heard about your app's recent valuation. That's quite something. You must be very proud." I smiled lightly. "It's not just an app anymore. The platform's being expanded across multiple sectors. Education, tech, healthcare, logistics. There's even a partnership underway with 2 international NGOs. Their eyes widened. Uncle Leonard cleared his throat. Max looked like someone had just told him gravity stopped working. "That's impressive," he muttered, "but it wasn't always like this." I continued, my tone soft but deliberate. "There were nights I slept in my studio, building lines of code while you guys vacationed in the Maldives. I launched 3 versions of the platform before even one investor looked at me seriously. And when I finally got seed funding, I didn't celebrate. I reinvested every single penny." Silence fell, not out of respect, but out of recognition. They were realizing this wasn't luck. It wasn't sudden. It was built in silence, out of sight and without their support. Max finally spoke. "Why didn't you say anything? You just disappeared for years. We thought you gave up." I met his eyes and replied with calm finality. "Because you never really listened, Max. You all made up your minds about me years ago. I wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. I was trying to survive. And eventually I thrived. That landed hard." Aunt Lorraine wrung her napkin between her fingers. "We were just worried you were isolating yourself," she said. "We didn't want to interfere." "No," I said firmly but gently. "You didn't want to believe that I had something valuable to say, until someone else believed it first." Uncle Leonard shifted in his seat. "Well, perhaps it's time we corrected that. Would you consider maybe partnering with Max? He's been looking into tech investments. It might be good to join forces, family and all." The irony of it almost made me laugh. The same cousin who laughed at my taxi now wanted a seat at my table. But I didn't laugh. I leaned forward, meeting every eye around that table. Partnerships require trust and mutual respect. You can't build anything real on top of mockery and dismissal. I don't hold grudges, but I also don't hand out opportunities where they haven't been earned. Max looked down. He knew the answer before I finished speaking. "I'm happy to help the family where I can," I added, "but from here forward I work with people who see me, not just when I arrive in a luxury car, but when I'm in the thick of building something real." The meal wound down quietly. There were no toasts, no family photos, just reflection. Something had changed not just in me, but in how they saw me. I hadn't sought revenge or drama. I'd simply arrived at their table as someone they could no longer ignore. And that, more than anything, was the victory. That evening as I drove away, my phone buzzed. A message from Max. "I messed up. I was jealous and I was cruel. But I see you now, truly, if you're ever open to it. I'd love to learn." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "Appreciate the honesty. Let's start with that. Because forgiveness, like success, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, built one truth at a time. The weeks following the gala brought an unexpected stillness to my life, one that was no longer dictated by my cousin's disdain or my family's selective pride. For the first time, I wasn't living in reaction to what they thought of me. I was existing on my own terms, rooted in my achievements and carried by a sense of calm I hadn't known in years. After the Royce moment and the string of whispers it left in its wake, the family group chat had gone oddly silent. No more passive-aggressive texts. No more links to my cousin Ezra's latest innovative project. It was as if the image of me stepping out of that chauffeured vehicle had cracked open a carefully curated illusion they all held together, that Ezra was the untouchable golden boy and I was a footnote. Now no one knew quite where to place me, but that was their problem to solve, not mine. I spent those weeks focusing on things that truly mattered, growing the nonprofit I'd launched quietly in the background for young entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities. The attention from the gala incident had sent a ripple through the investor world, and I was receiving calls from names I'd once only dreamed of meeting. People wanted to talk. More importantly, they wanted to listen. My ideas were no longer being laughed out of rooms. My vision, once dismissed as too naive, was finally getting the platform it deserved. And yet, as things grew brighter in the professional sense, I couldn't fully ignore the tension at home. My mother was caught in the crossfire of loyalty and guilt. She began calling more often, making tentative suggestions about grabbing lunch or stopping by for tea, as though softening the edges of the wedge that had been driven between me and the family. One afternoon, she finally said it. "You know, maybe Ezra didn't handle things the best way, but he's still family." Her voice was hesitant, but it was the first time she hadn't rushed to defend him blindly. I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to lean into the pettiness, to ask where that understanding was when I was being mocked for taking cabs to events or working out of a shared office space. But another part of me, perhaps the part that had finally grown past needing her approval, just said, "I know, Mom," because I did. I knew Ezra was family, and sometimes family lets you down more than strangers ever could. It wasn't long before another invitation came in, Ezra's engagement party, grand, over-the-top, predictably opulent. The invite was embossed with gold foil and cursive lettering, practically screaming, "Look at us," from the moment it landed in my mailbox. I turned it over a few times in my hands, unsure what to do. Part of me wanted to decline with the same snide tone Ezra once used. Another part of me, the quieter but stronger voice, told me to go, not for him, but for me. I RSVP'd yes. The day of the event, I arrived on time, wearing a tailored navy blue suit that spoke of confidence without screaming for attention. No chauffeur this time. I parked a few blocks away and walked. This wasn't about making a scene. This was about closure, or at least about owning my space in a room that once felt too small to contain my worth. The party was in full swing by the time I walked in. Laughter spilled from the back garden, champagne glasses clinked in every direction, and Ezra, of course, stood center stage beneath a canopy of fairy lights, surrounded by guests like some modern-day prince. His fiancée was lovely and seemed genuinely warm, which almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. Ezra noticed me from across the garden. I saw the flicker of surprise, maybe even apprehension, in his eyes. But he approached, drink in hand, smile tight. "Well, look who decided to show," he said, his tone just shy of gracious. "I figured I'd make time for family." I replied evenly, sipping from my glass. There was a long pause before he spoke again, his voice lower this time. "I meant to reach out after everything at the gala. Did you?" I raised an eyebrow. He had the decency to look away for a moment. Look, I was out of line, the jokes, the way I acted. I guess I didn't know how to deal with the fact that you weren't who I thought you were anymore. "That's the thing, Ezra," I said calmly. "I've always been who I am. You just didn't care to look." For once, he didn't have a comeback. Instead, he nodded slowly, the bravado dimming. Maybe I didn't want to. Because it was easier to mock than to admit we're equals. Not equals, he said, shaking his head slightly. You passed me a while ago. That hit differently. There was no sarcasm in his voice, no hint of mockery, just something resembling honesty. The conversation drifted after that. He was pulled away by one of the planners, and I wandered toward the edge of the garden, looking out over the string lights and clinking glasses. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt like peace, the kind that comes when you no longer need an apology to move on. Later that night, I stood by the dessert table, speaking with a former investor who had once turned me down, but now was eager to fund my next round. My cousin's friend, the same one who once laughed at me for pulling up in a taxi, approached and said, "Hey, I heard you're behind that mentorship program in Eastwood. That's incredible work." "Thanks," I said simply. People were seeing me now, not just the suit or the car, but the work, the ideas, the impact, and for the first time that was enough. I left the party before the final toast, slipped out quietly, without a wave or a need to be acknowledged. Because I didn't need their applause anymore. I had already learned how to clap for myself. The morning after Ezra's engagement party, I sat alone at my apartment balcony, a warm cup of coffee in hand, and the soft hum of the city below me. The event played back in my mind like a film reel. His stiff smile, the words he hadn't said, the quiet nod of acknowledgement that landed heavier than any toast or speech could have. I wasn't expecting a full, blown redemption arc from him. What I had hoped for and quietly received was clarity. And now, as dawn spilled into the sky, I realized that resolution didn't always come with grand gestures. Sometimes it was in the silence that followed the storm. Later that week, I received an invitation, not to another gala or party, but to speak at an entrepreneurship summit hosted by one of the very investors who had once brushed me off. They were now not only acknowledging my impact, but wanted me to share my story. Not the polished highlight reel, but the truth. The trials, the failures, the laughter at my expense, and how I turned it all into momentum. I accepted, but not for vanity. I accepted because I remembered how many times I sat in rooms full of polished speakers who never mentioned the struggle, only the win. I owed it to the next generation to tell the whole story. Before the event, I spent time refining my talk. I didn't want it to be just another tale of overcoming adversity. I wanted to talk about self-belief, about how sometimes the greatest validation doesn't come from applause, but from walking into a room full of people who once dismissed you and realizing you no longer care what they think. That was the victory. That was the freedom. When the summit day arrived, I walked onto the stage to a standing ovation. A year ago, I would have craved that applause. Now, I accepted it with humility, knowing that it wasn't the noise that defined my worth, but the silence I had endured before it. My speech was raw, filled with moments I'd once been too ashamed to share. The taxi ride to Ezra's party, the jokes made at my expense, the moment I chose not to retaliate with bitterness but with action. I spoke about investing in people, not just ideas, about building for the long term, and as I spoke, I saw heads nodding, tears forming, people seeing not just a success story, but themselves. After the event, I was approached by young founders, some shaking with nervousness, others bubbling with excitement. "Your story gave me hope," one woman said, her voice breaking. "I thought I had to become someone else to be taken seriously, but maybe I just have to become more of myself." That hit me harder than anything Ezra had ever said. Back home, I received a message from my Uncle Ezra's father. He wanted to meet. We hadn't spoken much in the last few years, and I wasn't sure what to expect. Still, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe far from the opulence of their usual hangouts. He looked older than I remembered, his posture less commanding, his tone gentler. "I watched your summit speech," he said after we ordered. "You spoke well, not just as a professional, as a man." I thanked him, unsure of where this was going. "I owe you an apology," he continued, "for the way our family treated you. We laughed at the cab rides, the struggles. We mistook humility for failure. And when you started succeeding, we assumed it was a fluke. But it wasn't. You built something. Without shortcuts, without privilege." I was silent, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as too little, too late. But another part saw it for what it was, growth. "I'm not looking for anything from you," he added. "I just wanted you to know that some of us see it now, and we're proud." It wasn't the same as hearing it from my own parents or from Ezra, but it mattered in its own way. A crack in the old wall of dismissal. A sign that things could change, even if slowly. A few weeks later, I hosted a fundraiser gala for my nonprofit. This time I was at the center of the planning, not just an afterthought. I made sure the event didn't scream wealth, it whispered purpose. It was elegant, intentional, and filled with people who believed in impact over image. As the evening unfolded, I noticed Ezra walk in, uninvited but welcome nonetheless. He didn't arrive with fanfare, no entourage, just himself. He waited until the evening was winding down before approaching me. "You've built something real," he said quietly, "and I see now. I wasted a lot of time trying to feel superior when I could have learned something." I looked at him, this cousin who once mocked my dreams like they were dust. Now he stood before me, not in defeat, but in awareness. "We all grow at different paces." I replied, "Some of us just need to be humble to get there." He nodded, his eyes clearer than I'd seen them in years. "If you ever want to collaborate on anything, I'd be honored." I didn't commit, but I didn't reject it either, because healing doesn't always look like closed doors. Sometimes it looks like slightly open ones, with boundaries. In the weeks that followed, things continued to evolve. My relationship with my mother softened. She called more often, no longer to compare but to connect. She asked real questions about my work, listened to my answers, and even attended one of my speaking events. At the end, she hugged me longer than usual and whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't see you before. I see you now." I didn't cry, I just held her a little tighter, because that was all I had ever really wanted, to be seen. As for the roles, Royce, I sold it eventually. Not because I needed the money, but because I didn't need the symbolism anymore. I donated the proceeds to my nonprofit, launching a scholarship program in my cousin's name. Ezra found out through the press, and instead of getting defensive, he sent me a short message. "You're classier than I would have been. Respect." That made me smile. By now, I had stopped counting wins based on who applauded or who fell silent. I measured success by the lives I was impacting, the minds I was changing, and the version of myself I continued to become. One grounded in self, worth, not approval. The cousin who once laughed when I arrived in a taxi had unknowingly gifted me a lesson. That moment of mockery was a turning point, a spark. Without it, maybe I wouldn't have pushed so hard to rise above, and for that, I was oddly thankful. Looking back now, I don't remember the brand of champagne they served at that party, or the sharp sting of embarrassment I felt when Ezra laughed at my arrival. What I remember instead is the soft click of the rolls, Roy's door opening, the stunned silence that followed, and the way the narrative shifted in an instant, not because of a flashy entrance, but because I didn't let their assumptions define me. The journey to that moment wasn't glamorous. It was built on quiet days, sleepless nights, and moments where quitting would have been the easiest choice. I didn't have a roadmap or a wealthy mentor handing me step-by-step instructions. What I had was an idea, and enough belief to carry it forward, even when those closest to me didn't understand it, especially then. The irony is that the people who mock you in your beginning often try to rewrite the story at your peak. They'll say they believed in you all along, that they knew you had it in you, but you'll know the truth. You'll remember every smirk, every dismissive comment, every room where you were invisible until you became undeniable. And that's where the real moral of this story lives. Not in revenge, not in proving anyone wrong, but in proving yourself right. I didn't build my company, my confidence, or my life around making someone else regret doubting me. I built it because I had to, because something inside me refused to settle for mediocrity, simply because it was more palatable for others. It's easy to want validation. It's human to crave recognition. But if that becomes your only driver, you'll lose your direction. Because the applause will never be loud enough to quiet your own doubts if you don't first learn to silence them yourself. When Ezra laughed, he wasn't just mocking the taxi. He was mocking the version of me he had created in his mind. The cousin who always came second, who lacked flair, who never quite fit into their curated world of appearances. He didn't know I was the founder of a rising company. He didn't know the investments I'd secured or the deals I'd closed while sitting in cafes wearing last year's clothes. But that's the beauty of keeping your success quiet. It speaks loudest when it needs to. And when it spoke, it did more than change their perception. It changed mine, because in that moment I realized I didn't need to chase moments like that anymore. I had already won long before the rolls, Royce, ever rolled up. The real victory wasn't the car or the shocked faces. It was the peace I felt inside, the kind that can't be bought, borrowed, or bestowed, the kind that only comes when you finally stop asking the world for permission to be proud of yourself. That's why I sold the rolls, Royce, not out of spite or some grand act of humility, but because I didn't need a symbol to know what I was worth anymore. I wanted that money to go towards something that truly mattered, to fund ideas, lift voices, and support the kind of people I once was. Underestimated, overlooked, but unbreakable. To anyone reading or listening to this, I'll say this. You don't owe anyone an explanation for taking the longer road. You don't have to dim your light just because someone else can't handle its glare. You don't have to wait for applause to start walking toward your dreams. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is succeed quietly, and let your results speak louder than your words ever could. It won't always be glamorous. There will be days when no one claps, when the bank account dips, when even your mirror reflects doubt. But hold your vision, protect it like something sacred, because it is. You will be laughed at, you will be underestimated, some will watch you struggle and feel better about themselves, others will root for you in silence, and a few will be shocked when you finally arrive. Let them be. Your journey is yours alone, and when that day comes, when you walk into the room they thought you didn't belong in, or pull up to the event they said you weren't invited to, don't do it for revenge. Do it because you never needed their validation to begin with. Do it because you've grown past needing to be seen. Do it because you see yourself clearly now. That's what happened to me. I no longer measure my worth by how many headlines I make, how many luxury cars I drive, or how many times someone finally says you were right. I measure it in impact, in the students my scholarship now supports, in the quiet messages from young dreamers who tell me they're still holding on because my story reminded them not to let go. Ezra may never fully understand what he gave me when he laughed that night. But I do. He gave me clarity. He reminded me that success isn't loud. It's steady. That power doesn't shout. It simply arrives. That respect isn't demanded, it's earned through resilience, grace, and quiet determination. So laugh if you must, doubt if you will, but remember, the quiet ones are often the ones building something extraordinary. And when it's ready, you won't need to say a word. Your work, your growth, and your presence will say everything.